Martha Huber, or Huber, or however you pronounce it. It's actually strikingly interesting how easily Paul Young got away with doing away with Martha Huber. Like, it's just so interesting and I guess fascinating from a story point of view how Paul Young nearly got away with killing Martha Huber. And I will say that if it hadn't been for Felicia Tillman, obviously he would have just completely gotten away with it, and Felicia wouldn't have. If Felicia hadn't been around, she wouldn't have been able to frame, Paul and everything, and all that. But that aside, I think it would have been wise for Paul Young to take care of Martha Huber through Mr. Shaw, because he'd already paid Mr. Shaw the money, so he might as well get your money's worth. So if I were Paul, I would have said, Mr. Shaw, can you remember how Paul just said, Mr. Shaw, keep the money, and Mr. Shaw was the hit guy that Paul hired, the private investigator. But anyway, Paul Young could have just said, Mr. Shaw, could you wait right here in my house? Let me go talk to Miss Huber and see what is up with her. And then after talking to Mrs. Huber and getting the information, then Paul could have sent Mr. Shaw to do away with Martha Huber. And I think with Mr. Shaw's help, with Mr. Shaw in the case, Mr. Shaw would have found out about Felicia Tillman, and Mr. Shaw would have gotten rid of Felicia Tillman as well. Maybe he would have charged Paul a little extra money, but he would have gotten rid of Felicia Tillman too. And that would have saved Paul Young a lot of trouble. He would have been saved a lot of trouble if he'd done that. And, or if, after Paul Young kills Martha Huber, and maybe I should just call him Todd Forrest, because Paul Young's real name is Todd Forrest, but anyway, after Paul Young killed Martha Huber, even if Paul Young had still lost his temper and just gone through with killing Martha Huber, he should have called Mr. Shaw and had Mr. Shaw take care of the whole thing, because then Martha Huber's body would have never been found, and then, Mr. Shaw would have gotten taken care of Felicia Tillman. So I think that would have just made Paul Young's life so much better. Or perhaps if Mary Alice Young maybe should have been a little more rational and careful, I guess, and she should have found out where the letter came from, and when she found out where the letter came from, she could have confronted Martha Huber about it, and then Mary Alice Young would have found out that Felicia Tillman is Martha Huber's sister, and then maybe Mary Alice should have talked to Felicia, and, Felicia would be like, hey, Angela Forrest, and then Mary Alice would be like, oh, no, my name is Mary Alice Young now, how are you doing? Could you, control your sister? And I think Felicia Tillman really seemed to like Mary Alice Young or Angela Forrest. And so I think Felicia would be willing to help Mary Alice, I think Felicia would be willing to keep Martha Huber under control, because Felicia did seem to like Mary Alice, as I said, and Felicia would probably tell Martha to calm down and stay in her lane, and I think Martha would probably be scared enough of her sister to listen. So yeah, so a lot of things could have been avoided. Basically, the whole Felicia Tillman, Martha Huber debacle could have been avoided. And really, Mary Alice should have just done a little more, thought a little more carefully, and then figured out about Felicia Tillman being Martha Huber's sister, and then used Felicia Tillman to control Martha Huber.